Hello, welcome. That is absolutely my favorite part. My name is Erica, as was said. I am an independent UX UI consultant and front-end developer, and I'm also certified in Umbraco. I'm located in the Pacific Northwest. As a side note, just trying to squeeze in a little plug, I'm also part of Team Scrift. If you haven't heard of us, we are an online magazine by the Umbraco community for the Umbraco community, and I am always looking for new voices to write articles. So if you're interested in learning more, please come talk to me. I'd love to tell you more about it. Back to my talk. While I do consider myself first and foremost a UX UI designer, which theoretically is platform independent, I have gone all in on Umbraco over the decade plus of my career. I use it myself, and I only work with devs and agencies and companies who also use it. As I do both design and dev, it's given me kind of a unique insight, I think, into some pain points that come along with those creative dev handoffs. So, in this talk, I will be attempting to articulate some of the things that I've learned along my journeys as I've been able to grow a very stable career over the years as a studio of one. And it's also helped me become a better, more conscientious designer in the process and has influenced the way that I work with others. My goal has always been to be the #1 designer that Umbraco devs want to work with because of my knowledge that I've gained over the years. So we're going to be talking about the art of componentization and the importance of it. We're going to be talking about lessons learned by me as a dev and from other devs about those pain points and how we can better communicate those with each other across the creative dev divide. And along the way, we're going to be talking about some strategies for how to go about this so you, as a dev, don't have to learn design, and designers, you don't have to learn dev the way that I did. So, years ago, when I was noodling ideas around this talk, I put a poll out on Twitter, when Twitter was so cool, if Umbraco devs thought it would be beneficial if designers knew Umbraco. And I was kind of crushed and surprised by the responses because they actually, a lot of them said no. So I got taken down a notch there. So a few did say yes, but most said it would be just more beneficial if they understood CMSs and how they work, the componentization, the partials of views, the pages, how everything is put together. The bigger complaint turned out to be about the front end, and I absolutely don't disagree there. When I code other people's designs, I can 100% tell who knows or is at least familiar with HTML and CSS and who does not. And the same goes for those who understand pattern libraries, componentization, and all that stuff, which goes back to how CMSs work. So even though this poll was done circa 2017, which is quite a few years ago now, even though it feels like yesterday, I would argue a lot of designers still don't understand those concepts and how to design for repeatable elements and uniformity, and how when we design similar but maybe slightly different elements, those exceptions, they might look good, but it impacts not only the front end, but also the back end, and it can have huge impacts for the content managers as well, and how that all works for the editors, and that can make or break an experience. And we all know when the content editors don't like it, they blame the platform, not the implementation. And it's not Umbraco's fault if they don't like their implementation. So, really quick, let's define what componentization is so we're all on the same page for the rest of this talk. This is a super simple homepage. I'm going to focus on this featured producers area right here. So here we have, sorry, there's a little time delay on my video, but hopefully it starts. Please start. There we go. We have our homepage here. We can see our general area, banner image, and here we have our main content, where I've added just a handful of blocks for this demonstration that a content editor could theoretically choose from. So we're picking featured producers, and we're giving the content editor the ability to name that row, do a view all link or some kind of link if they want, and then we have our featured items. We have a title, we have a description, which I'm using as a location, we have an image, and then we have a link for that to go off to on the rest of the site. This is the partial view that goes along with just that featured items row, right? So every time a content editor selects that, this is the HTML that is spit out, no exceptions. It will look like this every single time, no matter what they put in there, right? So it doesn't have to be featured producers. They can do events. They can do featured staff, whatever they want. It's going to show up this way every single time. So next, let's go through a site that I was asked to estimate what this would take to put in Umbraco. And at first, I was scrolling through and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of common patterns in here, stuff you see around the web. This should be no problem. Block list, block grid, whatever you want to do with it. And I thought, no problem. I am notorious for underestimating projects, as I'm sure a lot of you are as well. So on a plane ride home from Charlotte, last year's US Summit, I decided to pick apart this site to see what I could find. The first thing I came across were image links, or that's what I call them anyway. So the functionality is you have an image, it links off somewhere on the site. I found 3 different versions of them, and they all have, there's a different image crop, fine, whatever. There are different font styles, heading styles, sizes, alignments. And I cropped 2 of these images a little closely together, but the first 2 overlap on the background row above them. So they have a negative margin, but they overlap at different amounts. Same functionality, completely different styles. The next one, we have card listings. So the 2 stacked on the left-hand side, different use cases, same styles, well done. The other 2 are not, and we go back to that different font sizes, different heading styles, different alignments. We have image top, image bottom. We have kind of like a meta text or secondary headline that's either above the main headline, below the main headline. We have got a left-hand border, we've got not a left-hand border. Again, same functionality, different styles. The last one I want to call out is the image text pattern, which is very common around the web. So there are things about this one specifically that are not red flags for me, and that is whether that image is to the left or right, could be a setting, whether that link on there is a text link or if they want it more like a button link, call to action, and whether or not we have a double image or maybe just a single image option. Those things don't concern me. They can be a setting, right? The things that do stick out about this is, again, we've got a negative margin on those images that's pulling up outside of the background. And can anybody tell me how that text is aligned? Because it's not center aligned, it's not top aligned, it's not bottom aligned. And then we look deeper into the site to find more of this pattern style, right? And again, the first thing that jumps out to me with this one is the vertical alignment is different. It's on a different grid. The horizontal alignment is different. We've got that meta text again that's above and below the main headline. We have a completely different main headline style. So to me, I'm thinking, what do I do with this? Should we componentize it? Should we not componentize it? Does each individual piece need to do the old school way where we have fields for everything? I'm at a loss on why these decisions were made. Now, we're talking Umbraco, right? So I can build as many of these blocks as I need to and name them, this is a staff block, this is a producer block, this is a main headline. But why would I do that? That's a lot of time and that's a lot of chaos, right? It's chaos for your editors not knowing which ones to pick, and it's chaos for you as a dev that has to maintain this in the future. And then we end up, if you all went to Heather Floyd's talk yesterday, with the Frankensites and too many options. Editors think they want ultimate control over their designs, but they really don't. In anecdotal data, I would say that you can give a content editor 12 blocks and they will use 4 consistently. So it just comes out to be a nightmare all around. So now you're thinking, you're preaching to the choir. We get it. We're devs. We get componentization. We know what reusable code looks like. We know that it's awesome, especially when you're on a tight budget. It's the designers who don't get it. It's so frustrating. I totally agree, as a designer who gets mad at myself for decisions that I make in my designs. But we are not going to be solving this by going back to our designers and be like, you can't do this, you have to follow this rigid structure, and try to take away their creativity. I had a dev try to do that to me once early in my career, and let me just tell you, it did not go well. So we're not going to be doing that. But we are going to be solving this by taking a more active role in the whole project as a whole, right? And what I'm going to share next totally revolutionary. It's going to absolutely blow your mind. Have not heard this word spoken at this conference yet. We're going to communicate, and we're going to share the mental load of the project. I don't know if you know this, but designers have a lot to think about, and devs are probably not their #1 priority. So designers, I'm putting my designer hat on for a second. I have to do research, right? I have to study the competition. I have to collect this data. I have to figure out who the target users are, who we want the target users to be. Are we targeting them already? Do we need to redefine that? We're hypothesizing on how to solve their pain points. How are they flowing through the site? We're testing, and we're distilling that down into some gorgeous design. But wait, there's more. We are also having to think about business goals which often don't align with user goals. I don't know if you've met stakeholders, but they can be opinionated sometimes, and you have to figure out what that balance is, right? And so we're targeting these KPIs and ZAROs and all of this, and on top of that, I would argue that most designers still want to deliver something that dots all the I's and crosses all the T's, but they don't. And do you know why? They don't know what they don't know. It's taken me a lot of years to learn this because I had to learn it myself instead of somebody communicating it back to me. So if devs don't share their constructive feedback with designers, nothing's ever going to change, right? So when they do, we will have better projects that we're building together, right? When we're providing that feedback on what our experience is as a dev working with those designs, right? We're gonna have better products, we're gonna work in faster cycles, we're gonna have fewer bugs because we're communicating and we're doing it right the first time. And then that's just better rapport and less tension all around. Developers, engineers, you are ultimately the stewards of these projects, so fostering this relationship will just help you get there. Sorry, and I'm one slide behind. Because I'm in and out of all sorts of projects, because I am a studio of one, I don't always have access to a dev team when I'm designing something. If I'm the dev, I don't think I've ever had access to a designer if it wasn't something I designed myself. So I get the frustrations there. So what I want to do with the rest of this talk is start putting together a checklist that we can pass back to designers to make sure we're getting all the things we need to bring this project to life and have it be successful. So I have 6 points. So starting with #1, deviation from default styles and components. And I'm starting here because this is going to be based off that estimate. So these two cards stacked on the left, I would call that the default, right? And the other two are deviating. Do they need to be? No idea. Should they be? Maybe. But these are gotchas, at least for me, when I'm estimating every single time. And I am guilty of them still to this day, but I'm getting better at catching myself. But why are they bad? Why should we be talking about them? Because it is time consuming, and time is money. They're expensive to build, they're really expensive to maintain, and they worsen code health. We're maybe adding exceptions to our views. If it's this, then do this. If it's that, do that. And we're doing the same thing in our style sheets, right? We have our default styles, and then we have our deviation, 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 deviation. Code bloat comes on so quickly, so if we can nip some of that in the bud before it starts, we're gonna have a better project from the get-go. It can impact the editor experience, which I touched on already. We don't want an overwhelming amount of components to choose from, nor do we want an overwhelming amount of settings to configure those components, right? It feels empowering. Content editors think they want it to create these pages, but too many options creates chaos in the code, and it creates chaos for the editor. So let's just not even give them the option. And go. I do want to, what just happened? I do want to point out, though, that UX should still create new patterns when it's needed for the content and the user. This is more calling out those small deviations that are found late in the process that you have to go back and kind of Band-Aid, figure out what to do with them. #2, behavioral explanations. This is a site that I estimated a few years ago, and the designer put a ton of detail into the hero on the homepage, ton of motion detail, but nothing else was really included, no interactions or whatever. So I am a designer, and I'm capable of making good design decisions. I was doing some front-end stuff on this. But it was frustrating for me. He didn't design to a grid. He used a lot of colors and a lot of different font styles. And again, those interactive behaviors were not provided. I did not have access to him, so that meant I had to do it, right? And I grossly underestimated this project because I didn't account for me having to make those decisions. It's time consuming, and I get that. So that was my biggest lesson learned. Don't do that. Call timeout, re-estimate, kick it back. If I'd had my checklist at the time, I would have had something to give back to the client, to give to the designer, to make sure that we were getting what was missing. So what am I talking about for behavioral explanations? Things too static. Do we have all our button states? I'm looking at you, hover styles. Do we have all our link animations? Would you just, the traditional underline? Do you want something cooler? He did include one. I don't know if you can see it, with the image with the orange arrow. And I was like, okay, cool. That was 1 out of like 50. Modals and tooltips I'm throwing in here, I think, speaking as a designer, there's some part of my brain that thinks that that's just kind of like standard behavior, and just do it, dev, just do it. But I do get that there's more that goes along with that sometimes, especially when it comes to like, how is it triggered, how is it dismissed, what does it do on touch devices versus desktop devices, etc. So these are all things we can be putting in our checklist to make sure we're receiving them. I'm going to come back to transition animations on this next one. Sometimes we receive too focused proofs or design specs, and they're too focused on certain details, but they lack that overarching picture, right? And I find this comes about sometimes if we are handed individual pages at a time and we don't get to see what the whole site behavior is. So we want to be able to account for things like transition animations once or twice, and how that applies to the whole process, so we're not pigeonholing ourselves into certain areas. So making sure we're asking for those things up front. Screen sizes and responsiveness, I'm also putting under behavioral explanations. Interestingly, on this one, I have talked to some front-enders who prefer not to receive mobile designs, as sometimes designers change too much between desktop and mobile. So this is a case of ask for what you want and tell them what you don't want, right? Because we wanna be making sure that everything flows seamlessly, makes sense for keyboard users and screen readers and things like that. I tend to provide guidance for navigation and the footer if it's complex, and any complex parts within the site, but I don't do the site as a whole unless I'm asked for it. Number 3, whoa, what just happened? Okay. And where was I? Well, that was embarrassing. At least I didn't fall off the stage or anything. Okay, number 3 is edge cases. I know early in my career, I never provided edge cases because I didn't know there was such a thing as edge cases. I spent so much time designing that perfect flow that I thought, there's not going to be an edge case. I nailed it. Yep, that doesn't happen. So I am cataloging 3 different types of edge cases. If you can read really fast, you might have seen. The first one I am calling contextual or situational. It's unique to certain areas of a design, right? So maybe it's a signed out state. What does your, maybe your eyebrow nav look like when you're signed out versus signed in? So making sure you have both those states. Maybe you have an empty state. Maybe a user can upload an avatar or something, and the proof you're provided with shows the avatar uploaded. So what does that look like without the avatar uploaded? Fonts or images unavailable. I would say more so than unavailable of if like images, if you have like a staff listing, let's say, and then you have a new staff member and you haven't had a chance to put an image there. Do you have a placeholder image? What does that look like if there's not an image there? Maybe you have some kind of press back or dismiss functionality. What does that look like? So it's contextual to certain areas of the design. Next, we have those ever-present or those always there features. So they're present across the site as a whole. So say it's an app, you have an online and an offline state, but you're only provided with one. So what does the other one look like? Loading states, again, embarrassed to say this recently came on my radar. I've been asked for one before, didn't know I needed to provide one, caught it by accident. So making sure that if you need one for an app or whatever you're building, that you get one. Error states, form errors are a big complaint from devs of something that's never provided. So making sure that if there's a form included on the site or anything else that has an error state, that you're receiving error states. The last one I'm putting in edge cases is internationalization, and yes, that is with a Z because I am American. I'm putting this under edge cases because I've only worked on a handful of internationalized sites, but some of you from Europe, this might deserve its own bucket because you do it all the time. But are we accounting for it? Do we know about it before we start? Right to left text, longer translations. When we translate stuff from English to German or Spanish, French, especially in the main navigation, those words tend to be more verbose. So are we accounting for that and not having to band-aid it later when we have spacing issues? Number 4, accessibility. Y'all, this one's a huge pet peeve of mine because it is 2024. What are we doing? Whatever our part in the project is, from project manager to designer to dev to QA, we all need to have each other's backs and making sure that we're producing something that is inclusive and accessible to everyone. Full stop. No excuses. I do inherit a lot of things, a lot of legacy things. The number one thing is usually color contrast, and I think it's one of the easiest things to fix. So if there's not a designer involved, or if I am the designer involved, it's my job to go back to the client and discuss with them why their approved designs need to change. This can be sticky sometimes if they have approved branding colors that they're really tied to, but you need to have that conversation and say it's non-negotiable. Other things, touch targets, focus flow, accessibility labels, semantics, all of those things, we need to account for them up front so we're not getting held up in QA because it's not passing, right? And we're not delaying launches. That means more money, bigger budget, and sometimes code bloat when we're going back and retrofitting things. So just account for those things up front. Make sure your designers know about them too. I know light gray is awesome when you want to de-emphasize something, but let's just not do it on white. Number 5 is variable names. This is something I wish I had known about since the beginning of my career. This stuff is the bomb. I love it. When I started in my career, we were still using tools like Photoshop, where you couldn't really do variable names. But now designers have tools, Figma, Sketch, XD. We can create libraries, and we can use the same variable names that are going to go in the code. So devs, do you have a naming convention that you like that you can share with your design teams or the designers that you work with? And set that standard. Let's take that guesswork out of, are these 5 similar shades of blue intentional, or were you just lazy and eyedroppering it? So we can create these standards and save time and then save money. So we're not maybe, when we go to add a feature later and it's a slightly different color, you're like, nope, this is the variable name. This is what we're using to make it standardized and save time. I'm doing really awesome on time. I'm so excited about this. My last one is infeasible or budget prohibitive designs, and perhaps I should have started with this one first because it was the one that I was most attuned to when I first started my learning journey. I had a great conversation with my pal Matt Brailsford, who you might know. Putting on my designer hat, we like to flex our creativity. We look and consume so much on the web and see all these cool things, and we're constantly filing them away thinking, how can I take inspiration from these things to use on my clients' projects? But if a designer doesn't have access to a dev team or doesn't have any knowledge about development or the platform, sometimes those things can get easily out of control and they can be cost prohibitive. And this is the one that causes probably the most tension on projects, I would say. If design gets something signed off by the client and the client's really excited about it and it goes to dev and dev says, I can't do that in this budget. I can't do that in this timeline. And then the client feels like they've been bait and switched when they get that scope change. So ways around this that I've come up with, are things of making sure I know, if I'm not doing the dev myself, making sure I know if there are any frameworks or code stacks that the dev is going to use. So is it Bootstrap? Is it Tailwind CSS? If I know that, I will design within that framework to make sure that we stay on budget for that. Is it Vue.js? Is it React? Is it jQuery? Does anybody use jQuery anymore? I don't know. But if I want to add some kind of cool like gallery feature or something, if I know that Vue or React are going to be used on the project, I will go look for a pre-made library out there that fits within the scope of the budget so we can still do something cool and interactive. I'm not going to go find a jQuery one because we're not using jQuery on the project, right? That helps to keep these things under control. If you do have designers and devs on the same team and you're not an indie like me, you know, just making sure we're running our crazy ideas by dev before we pitch them to the client, so we're taking that tension out of the process. So we have hit our recap. We are going to be, on our checklist that we're making, asking for more than just that golden path and making sure those edge cases, especially the always there cases, are accounted for. Before implementation, we are going to be working with design to identify those style and component deviations, either from established patterns or code libraries that you already have, or just picking them out from the get-go to make sure we're asking why the designer did this. This is a great learning opportunity for devs to be able to ask why. Get into the thought process from that designer. Why did you make this decision? I would say 90% of the time I have a reason why I did something. It's that maybe last 10%, 2%, 5%, whatever that is, that I just wasn't thinking. I thought, no, it just looks cooler this way. Does it need to be that? No. But have that conversation. And it's also a great teaching moment for you as a dev to invite those designers in. Let them watch you break apart a design. What is your thought process when you're going through them so they know how you view it, because we view things differently, right? So let them watch you, talk them through your thought process on what that does, all those deviations, what it does to the code and how that bloat's created, or what it does to the timeline for the project. We are going to be providing a list of common interactive behaviors that should always be included in the design spec, so we're not having to pause and go back to design saying, what do you want to do when this happens, right? You're already going to have that information up front. We're going to work with design on creating naming conventions, so we're all using the same variable names. Accessibility, it's all our responsibilities. Just need to do it, full stop, have each other's backs on this. And give a heads up on any frameworks or libraries you'll be using for the project. Ask design to run any wild ideas by you before pitching to the client. As a designer, sometimes if I'm designing something for a client and there's not a dev on board yet, I will find a dev and go ask them, what does it take to do this? How feasible is it? You can do the same. We have a great community here. Jump on Slack, jump on Discord, and just be like, what do you think for that? So there's a lot that goes into a well-designed functional site or app. Design and dev, we're a partnership. We're not a hierarchical structure. And when we spend time engaging with each other, providing feedback, sharing our thought processes, listening to their thought processes, we not only set each other up for success, but we have a better overall project and product. And I think the clients feel that too when everybody gets along, right? So we're going to have a healthier code base because we're going to have extensible components, not one-offs. We're going to be minimizing maintenance going forward. We're going to have faster workflows, less guessing around the gaps in info because we've asked for it and made sure we've had it up front before it goes to implementation. We're minimizing that back and forth. We're not having to wait for design to be freed up again so they can get back to you on these things that are missing, right? Because you're going to ask for it up front. We have smoother launches because of all that. We're not getting blocked. Things aren't getting held up in QA for not being fully developed or done. It's just going to go. And then we have better rapport, less frustration all the way around. That is what I have for you. Thank you very much. I did create a starter cheat sheet with this QR code. If you want it, please take it. Please find inspiration from it. Make it your own, whatever works for you. These are just some of the things from this talk. And thank you very much.